My name is Margaret Hale. I am 58 years old, and the morning my life changed forever began in a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. I woke up expecting nothing more than another ordinary day, the same quiet routine I had followed for years, but instead I found something that made my chest tighten before I could even understand it. My pillow was covered in strands of silver hair, my hair long, soft, and once carefully cared for, now scattered like something discarded. For a moment, I couldn't move. My fingers trembled as I reached up, expecting to feel the familiar weight falling past my shoulders, but all I touched were uneven, jagged ends. It felt wrong, like touching a stranger's reflection instead of your own face. I rushed to the mirror, and what I saw standing there wasn't the woman I had been just hours ago. It was someone smaller, someone diminished, like a piece of her had been taken without permission. My voice came out as a whisper I barely recognized. Why would someone do this to me? I stepped out of my room slowly, almost like I didn't belong there anymore, like I was walking through someone else's house. From the kitchen, I heard laughter, casual, light, completely untouched by what had just been done to me. When I entered, Laura, my daughter-in-law, was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, watching me as if she had been waiting for this moment. There was no surprise on her face, only satisfaction. My son Daniel stood beside her, his eyes glued to the floor, as if avoiding my gaze could erase his part in whatever had happened. Laura spoke first, her tone calm, almost pleasant, like she was discussing something ordinary. She said she had done me a favor, that I needed to look more appropriate, more modern, less like I was clinging to the past. And then, with a small smile that carried no kindness, she added something that cut deeper than any scissors ever could. She said I needed to learn my place in this house. My place, the words echoed in my head like something unreal. This house, the walls I had built my life inside, the memories I had protected for decades, reduced to a place where I needed permission to exist. I didn't shout, I didn't argue. But inside me, something burned quietly, something that had been ignored for far too long. Because this moment, this cruelty, didn't appear out of nowhere. It had been growing slowly, quietly, like cracks forming in a foundation you pretend is still strong. There was a time when this house was filled with love. My husband, Robert Hale, used to sit behind me every evening after dinner, gently brushing my hair with a patience that made the world feel softer. He used to say my silver strands looked like moonlight, calm and steady. Our love wasn't loud or dramatic, it lived in small things, warm cups of tea, soft music in the background, quiet conversations that stretched into the night. When he passed away 6 years ago, the silence he left behind felt unbearable, but my hair remained, like a piece of him I could still hold onto. Keeping it long wasn't about vanity, it was about memory. It was the last connection I had to the life we built together. After he was gone, the house felt too big, too empty. So when Daniel and his wife needed a place to stay, I welcomed them without hesitation. I told myself it was temporary, that helping them would bring warmth back into the home. I cooked for them, cleaned, even transferred money to their account every month to ease their burden. At first, it felt right, like I was still needed. But slowly, things began to change. Small things, things easy to ignore if you wanted peace badly enough. They stopped asking me to join them for meals. Conversations became shorter, colder. Laura began treating me less like family and more like something that simply existed in the background. Daniel, my own son, the boy I had raised with care and sacrifice, started to fade into her shadow, agreeing with her without question, avoiding conflict even when silence hurt more than words. I told myself he was tired, stressed, just trying to build his life. I made excuses for him because accepting the truth felt worse, but the truth was already there. I saw it in the way Laura spoke about the house, calling it outdated, heavy, like it was something holding her back. I heard it one afternoon when she mentioned, almost casually, that selling this place could solve their problems if circumstances changed. That word, if, it didn't sound like a possibility, it sounded like a plan. Still, I stayed quiet. I convinced myself that love meant patience, that family meant endurance. I ignored the way my presence became smaller day by day, how I went from being the owner of the home to feeling like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The dinners I cooked went untouched. The kindness I offered went unacknowledged. And slowly, without realizing it, I began to disappear inside my own life. The day it happened, the day my hair was cut, wasn't sudden. It was the final step in something that had been building for months. That afternoon, rain tapped gently against the windows, the kind of soft sound that usually made the house feel peaceful. I sat on the couch for a moment to rest, and without realizing it, I fell asleep. My hair spread across the cushion behind me, loose and calm like it always had been. And then, a sound, a sharp metallic snip. At first my mind couldn't understand it. It didn't belong to anything familiar. Then another cut, closer this time. I felt something, a pull of fingers gathering my hair tightly. My eyes opened slowly, still heavy with sleep, trying to make sense of what was happening, and when I turned my head, I saw her. Laura stood behind me, holding a thick handful of my hair in one hand and a pair of scissors in the other. For a second, my mind searched desperately for a gentle explanation, something that could make this feel less real. But the strands falling to the floor, the uneven weight on my shoulders, told me everything I needed to know. She had been cutting it for a while, and she had no intention of stopping. And what she said next would change everything forever. For a few seconds, I couldn't even speak. My body felt frozen, like my mind was trying to protect me from fully understanding what was happening. Strands of my hair slid down my shoulders and into my lap, falling slowly like something fragile breaking apart in silence. Laura didn't step back, she didn't look startled or ashamed. Instead, she watched me with a calm, almost satisfied expression, as if she had just completed something important. Daniel stood near the doorway, his face pale, his posture stiff, but he didn't move toward me. He didn't say a single word, and somehow his silence hurt more than the scissors ever could. I finally found my voice, but it came out weak, barely holding together. I asked her why, just one word, but it carried everything inside it. Confusion, pain, disbelief. Laura tilted her head slightly, like she was surprised I even needed an explanation. She said I should thank her, that I looked better already, cleaner, more appropriate for someone my age. Her voice stayed steady, almost casual, like she was talking about rearranging furniture instead of cutting away something that held decades of meaning. Then she said it again, slower this time, clearer, that I needed to understand my place in this house. My place, those words didn't just hurt, they settled into something deeper, something colder. I touched what was left of my hair, uneven, rough, unfamiliar, against my fingers. Memories rushed through my mind all at once, Robert standing behind me with a brush, his gentle hands moving slowly, his quiet voice telling me how beautiful it looked. 30 years of love, of comfort, of identity now scattered across the floor like it meant nothing. And Laura, without hesitation, bent down, gathered the strands into a pile and swept them into a plastic bag. No apology, no pause. Just a clean ending, as if she was erasing something that never mattered to begin with. Daniel finally said my name, but it came out so softly it barely reached me. It wasn't a defense, it wasn't a protest, it was just noise. I stood up slowly, my balance uncertain, not because of the haircut, but because something inside me had shifted in a way I couldn't yet explain. I walked away without saying another word, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew anything I said in that moment would break me completely. That night, I sat alone in my room with the door locked. A towel rested over my shoulders, catching the loose strands that still fell whenever I moved. I stared at my reflection for a long time, trying to recognize the woman looking back at me. The pain didn't come as tears, it came as stillness. Heavy, suffocating stillness. Every small moment I had ignored over the past months replayed in my mind: the dinners eaten alone, the quiet disrespect, the way my kindness had slowly been turned into expectation. Losing my hair felt like losing the last piece of the life I had with Robert, but beneath that grief something else began to form. A voice, quiet at first, but steady. "You are still here." It felt strange, finding clarity in pain instead of comfort. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what they needed, I was thinking about what I had allowed. The next morning, I opened the old wooden chest at the foot of my bed. It had been years since I last looked inside. Carefully, I lifted the lid, revealing pieces of a life that once felt full, letters Robert had written me when we were young, photographs from trips we could barely afford, small keepsakes that carried more meaning than anything money could buy. Beneath all of it, there was something I had almost forgotten. A folder. My hands hesitated for a moment before opening it, but when I did, there it was, the deed to the house. My name, and only my name, printed clearly across the page. I stared at it longer than I expected to, letting the truth settle in fully. All this time, I had been acting like I was living in their space, adjusting myself, shrinking myself, trying to keep peace. But the reality was simple. They were living in mine. That realization didn't come with anger, it came with something far more powerful. Clarity. I began to think differently, to see things I had been ignoring. The money I had been giving them every month, the bills I covered, the years of quiet sacrifice that had slowly erased my own presence in my own home. I had convinced myself it was love, but love without boundaries had turned me invisible. Later that day, as I walked past the living room, I saw Laura sitting at the table, flipping through a glossy real estate magazine. Her pen moved across the pages, circling expensive apartments, marking places far beyond anything they could afford on their own. Daniel sat beside her, nodding occasionally, his attention fixed on the future they were planning, a future that clearly didn't include me. So that was it. The house wasn't just a place to stay for them, it was a stepping stone. Something to use and then leave behind. They looked up when I entered the room, but neither of them spoke. Maybe they expected me to pass by quietly like I always did, to fade into the background like I had trained myself to do. But this time I didn't move. I stood there just a little longer than usual, long enough for the silence to feel different. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, but I was no longer pretending I didn't see the truth. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside a law office. The air felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just the weight of what I was about to do. My hand rested on the door handle for a moment before I pushed it open. I hadn't taken a step like this in years, not even after Robert passed away. But this wasn't about loss anymore. This was about reclaiming something that had always been mine. The lawyer was calm, direct, and unlike anyone I had spoken to in a long time, he asked me questions that actually mattered. Not about finances, not about paperwork, but about me. Was I happy? Did I feel respected? Did I feel safe in my own home? Each answer came easier than I expected, because deep down I already knew the truth. Within an hour, everything was prepared. Documents that clearly stated what I had never been able to say out loud. A formal notice giving Daniel and Laura 30 days to leave the house. Financial support terminated immediately. No confusion, no negotiation, just a line drawn where there had never been one before. As I drove back home, my hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my heart felt different, not afraid, not angry, just certain. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to what was happening around me. I was deciding what would happen next. When I walked into the house, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Daniel was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. Laura sat at the table, still flipping through those same pages, still planning a future built on something that was never hers. I took a slow breath, and then I asked them both to sit down. They looked confused, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was about to shift. And when I placed those papers on the table, everything changed. The moment the papers touched the table, the air in the room shifted in a way that couldn't be ignored. Laura reached for them first, her confidence still intact, her expression almost bored, as if she expected nothing more than another household matter I needed help understanding. But as her eyes moved across the page, that expression began to change, slowly at first, then all at once. The calm disappeared, confusion replaced it, and then anger, sharp, immediate, and impossible to hide. Daniel took the papers from her hands, reading more carefully, more slowly. I watched his face as the meaning settled in, as the words became real to him. 30 days to leave, financial support ended, legal notice clear and final. When he finally looked up at me, it was the first time in a long time that he truly saw me, not as background, not as someone who would quietly accept everything, but as someone who had made a decision. "Mom, you can't do this," he said, his voice unsteady, like the ground beneath him had suddenly disappeared. I didn't interrupt him. I let him speak, let him ask every question that had suddenly become urgent. Where would they go? How would they manage? What had they done that was so wrong? His words came faster with each question, like he was trying to outrun the reality forming in front of him. But I had already lived that reality quietly for months. Laura, on the other hand, didn't ask questions. She slammed her hand against the table, her anger loud and unapologetic. She accused me of being unfair, of turning against my own family, of making a selfish decision after everything they had been through. She said she deserved a place in this house, that she had a right to it now, and for the first time I didn't shrink under her voice. I spoke calmly, but there was something different in my tone, something steady, something immovable. I told her that respect and rights are not the same thing, that sharing a home requires more than presence, it requires care, acknowledgement, basic human decency. And those things had been missing for a long time. Daniel looked at me again, but this time his voice was quieter, softer, almost like he already knew the answer before asking. "Do you really mean this?" I nodded. Yes, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of survival. The days that followed were tense at first. They moved through the house like strangers, packing slowly, speaking less, waiting, maybe hoping that I would change my mind, that I would return to the version of myself they had grown used to, the one who gave without limits, who stayed silent to keep peace. But that version of me was gone. The money stopped immediately. The routines changed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was disappearing inside my own home. On the 29th evening, they were ready to leave. Laura walked out first, her posture stiff, her pride still intact, as if admitting fault would cost her more than losing the house. Daniel stayed behind for a moment longer. He stood near the doorway, looking at me like there were words he wanted to say, but didn't yet know how to form. Then, without speaking, he turned and followed her. And just like that, the door closed. The silence that followed should have felt heavy, empty, but it didn't. It felt different. It felt like space, like something that had been suffocating me had finally been removed. For the first time in years, the quiet in that house belonged to me. The first few days were strange. Every room felt bigger. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered. The kitchen, once filled with overlapping voices and constant noise, now greeted me with nothing but stillness. But it wasn't loneliness, not the kind I had feared. It was peace. I began to move through my days differently. I rearranged the furniture, opened windows that had stayed shut for too long, let fresh air fill spaces that once felt heavy. I cooked meals again, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. I sat at the table and ate slowly without feeling rushed or unnoticed. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror again. My hair was still short, uneven in places, a reminder of what had been taken. But as I looked closer, I realized something had changed. I no longer saw loss the same way. I saw strength. Weeks passed, and life began to take on a new rhythm. I joined a small painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. I planted flowers near the front porch, lavender that slowly began to bloom, bringing color back into a space that had felt dull for too long. People there called me by my name, not by my role, not by what I could do for them, just my name. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Then one evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my heart paused in a way I couldn't control. When I answered, his voice was different, quieter, heavier. He told me Laura had left, that things hadn't worked out the way they had planned, that work had become unstable. And then he told me he was at the hospital after a minor accident. He didn't ask for much, just if I could come. And I did. When I saw him lying there, tired, vulnerable, stripped of the confidence he once carried, I didn't see the man who had stood silently while I was hurt. I saw my son, the boy who used to run to me when he was afraid. He apologized before I could even sit down, not quickly, not out of obligation, but sincerely. He said he understood now how much I had given, how much I had endured without saying anything. I listened, and then I made something clear: I would help him, but not the way I had before. I gave him 90 days, support, guidance, time to rebuild, but with a boundary that would not be crossed again. After that, he would stand on his own, and this time he agreed without hesitation. Slowly, he began to change. He found work not perfect, not glamorous, but honest. He learned how to take care of himself, how to manage life without depending on someone else to carry it for him. And little by little, something between us began to heal. Now he visits on Sundays, not because he needs a place to stay, but because he wants to sit across from me at the table, drink coffee, and talk, really talk, the way we used to before everything became complicated. My hair has grown since then, still shorter than it once was, but softer now, lighter, as if it no longer carries the weight of everything it once represented. I don't hide it anymore. I don't try to fix it into what it used to be. Because I've realized something important. What was taken from me didn't define me. What I chose to rebuild did. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with a warm cup of tea, watching the world wake up slowly. The house feels alive again, not because it's full of people, but because it's full of peace. There are flowers by the steps, brushes by the window, and a quiet sense of belonging that no one can take away from me again. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Love is not measured by how much you tolerate. It's measured by the boundaries you are brave enough to set. Because the moment you stop shrinking for others is the moment your life finally begins again.